Joe Biden was born closer to Abe Lincoln's presidency than to his own. If someone born today were sworn in at age 78, the same age Biden was, they would become president in the year 2106. When the microchip was invented in 1958, Belgium was still displaying people from the Congo in human zoos. T-Rex lived closer in time to humans than to the Stegosaurus. Jack the Ripper was actively murdering people, Van Gogh painted Starry Night, the Eiffel Tower was completed, and Nintendo was founded, all in the year 1889. The 10th U.S. President, John Tyler, who was born in 1790, has grandchildren that are still alive today. The last widow of a Civil War veteran just died in 2020. 17-year-old Helen Jackson married 93-year-old James Bolin in 1936 so that she could claim his military pension after he died. And lastly, there are more slaves today than at any point in the history of the world. Actor David Harbour has been very open about his dark past, particularly his struggles with mental health, diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 25 after a severe manic episode. Harbour was admitted to a mental hospital when he started believing he was receiving divine messages and was possibly the Antichrist. Prior to this, he spent years battling alcohol addiction, which began in his teens and only worsened in college, leading to a life he described as lonely, directionless, and self-destructive. He's admitted to violent emotional outbursts during manic episodes, such as smashing mirrors and feeling like a danger to himself and others. At his lowest, he felt like he was slowly disappearing and contemplated taking his own life. Harbour now credits acting with saving his life since it gave him a way to channel his mental chaos into performance. Now sober and in treatment, he describes himself as someone who enjoys consciousness too much to ever return to his old ways. While filming The 7-Year Itch in 1954, a crowd of over 1,500 New Yorkers swarmed 51st Street to witness Marilyn Monroe's now iconic skirt-blowing scene. As her white dress billowed up with each gust from the subway grate, onlookers reportedly shouted, "Higher, higher," turning the shoot into a public spectacle. Monroe's possessively abusive husband, Joe DiMaggio, was reportedly furious over the display. That night, he physically assaulted her so violently that she filed for divorce just 3 weeks later, citing mental cruelty as the reason. Just recently, American YouTuber Mikhailo Polyakov was arrested after illegally traveling to North Sentinel Island, home to an uncontacted and highly vulnerable tribe protected by Indian law. Known for his danger tourism stunts, Polyakov used a dinghy and GPS to reach the Forbidden Island, where he left a coconut and a can of Diet Coke as offerings while he recorded the encounter. His actions violated strict laws banning all contact with the Sentinelese to prevent disease exposure and cultural disruption. It was his third attempt to approach the violent tribe, and he now faces up to 5 years in prison amid widespread outrage over his idiotic stunt. In 2010, 35-year-old Steve Carter made a startling discovery when he found an age-progressed image of himself on a missing children's website. Though he knew he was adopted, this led to the shocking discovery that he was actually Marks Barnes, a child that was abducted in Hawaii in 1977. When he was just a baby, his biological mother had kidnapped him during a custody dispute, changed both their identities, and raised him under a fake name. DNA tests confirmed his true identity, and after 34 years, he was reunited with his biological father, who had never stopped searching for him. Morbid Facts, Part 599. Muppets creator Jim Henson's death was made all the more tragic by how easily it could have been prevented. In May of 1990, he dismissed what seemed like mild flu-like symptoms, unaware that his body was actually under attack by a rare strain of Group A Streptococcus. The bacteria ravaged his lungs, filling them with blood and fluid as he slipped into septic shock. By the time he stumbled into the ER, several of his organs were already shutting down, as doctors described it as being hit by a freight train of bacteria. Despite frantic attempts to save him, Henson died at age 53, 20 hours after arriving at the hospital. Medical experts later said that if he had arrived just a few hours earlier, he likely would have survived. In a chilling discovery, archaeologists have found the first physical evidence of ancient Roman gladiators battling wild animals, an 1800-year-old skeleton in York, England bearing lion bite marks on the pelvis. Excavated from Driffield Terrace, a site believed to be a gladiator cemetery, the remains belong to a man aged between 26 and 35. The bite marks on his pelvis showed no signs of healing, indicating that the injuries were most likely fatal. This is why you should never make eye contact with a gorilla. The average silverback gorilla is 4 to 9 times stronger than the average human male. They can deadlift 1,800 pounds, and their grip can crush the skull of a crocodile. Luckily, gorillas in captivity and in the wild have been known to be very peaceful creatures that will only attack when provoked. But this doesn't mean there haven't been a few isolated cases of stupid people pushing their luck. In 2007, a woman frequently visited Germany's Rotterdam Zoo and spent a lot of time smiling at the male gorilla Bokito. Zoo employees warned her many times about making eye contact with him, since greater apes typically interpret eye contact as a display of aggression. But the woman claimed she and Bokito shared a special bond, so she ignored these warnings. Until one day, Bokito decided he had enough when some kids were throwing rocks at him, so he leaped over the water ditch that separated him from visitors. He immediately went straight for the woman and brutally attacked her, dragging her around for hundreds of feet and inflicting numerous broken bones as well as more than 100 bite wounds. The woman narrowly survived the attack, spending months in the hospital and undergoing several reconstructive surgeries. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called achromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all 3 cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. In one of the most horrifying cases of human captivity, Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter Elizabeth in a hidden basement beneath their Austrian home for 24 years, beginning in 1984. He repeatedly tortured and raped her, fathering 7 of her children, 3 of whom were raised in the underground dungeon without ever seeing daylight. The space was initially built as a bomb shelter and had no windows, was soundproofed, and could only be accessed through a series of hidden electronically locked doors that Fritzl installed himself. The monster kept up a front by convincing authorities and his wife that Elizabeth had joined a cult, even forging letters to support the lie. But the case was exposed in 2008 when one of the captive children fell critically ill and was brought to a hospital, prompting an investigation. Fritzl was arrested, convicted of many awful crimes, and sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility. The dungeon was later sealed with concrete, while Elizabeth and her surviving children were placed under new identities. In 1994, British Parliament member Stephen Milligan was found dead in his London home under bizarre and scandalous circumstances. His body was partially dressed in women's lingerie with a plastic bag over his head, a cord around his neck, and a slice of orange in his mouth. His death was ruled as accidental, likely the result of autoerotic asphyxiation. Around 5000 BC, a man sat down in the harsh climate of Chile's Atacama Desert and has remained in that position ever since. The extreme dryness of the region naturally mummified the remains, leaving the skin, hair, and clothing astonishingly intact after more than 7,000 years. In other words, he's been chilly in there for a long time. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his ribcage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. Juana Barraza, known as the Little Old Lady Killer, was a Mexican professional wrestler who murdered at least 16 elderly women in Mexico City between 1998 and 2006. She posed as a social worker to gain access to her victims' homes, then strangled them, often with cords or her bare hands, and stole their belongings. Her strength and wrestling background, performing under the name the Lady of Silence, made her attacks especially brutal. Panic gripped the city as authorities struggled to solve the case until she was finally caught fleeing a murder scene. Barraza later confessed a deep resentment toward her abusive mother and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. While filming Jackass No. 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day. Actor Gaten Matarazzo, who plays Dustin in Stranger Things, was born with a rare genetic condition called cleidocranial dysplasia, affecting the development of bones and teeth. The condition left him without collarbones, caused severe dental issues, and required multiple painful surgeries. He was initially rejected from acting roles due to his appearance and speech, as his future in entertainment looked quite grim until Stranger Things incorporated his condition into the character. In more severe cases, CCD can lead to skull malformations, fragile bones, and life-threatening complications. Gaten now uses his platform to raise awareness and support others living with the condition. Nanny Doss was a seemingly sweet, smiling woman who murdered at least 11 members of her own family between the 1920s and 50s. Her victims included 4 husbands, 2 children, her own mother, 2 sisters, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law, most of whom died mysteriously in their sleep or after sudden bouts of illness. Doss used arsenic-laced foods, poisoned drinks, and other subtle methods to kill, often collecting the insurance money of the victims after murdering them. When she was finally arrested in 1954, she giggled through her confessions, earning her the nickname the Giggling Granny. Pop icon Claude Francois, often hailed as the French Elvis, met a gruesome end in 1978 when he tried to fix a flickering light bulb while standing in a bathtub filled with water. The 39-year-old received a severe electric shock that immediately fried his internal organs and stopped his heart. A family preparing to bury a loved one was shocked to find that one of the burial plots they had purchased was already occupied. Despite extensive efforts, no one could determine who the mystery individual was or how they ended up buried there. Rather than exhume the remains, the family decided to let the unknown person rest in peace, marking the grave with a headstone that simply read, "Random Person." In the 1960s, the CIA was looking for creative ways to spy on the Russians without being noticed. That's when they came up with the genius idea to use a cat to record Russian conversations. A veterinary surgeon implanted a microphone in the cat's ear and a radio transmitter at the base of its skull. The plan was for the cat to be released near a Soviet embassy and innocuously record any dialogue amongst the men. But after 5 years of research and $20 million in funding, the cat was struck and killed by a taxicab almost immediately. Over a 14-year span, Mary Beth Tinning's children kept dying mysteriously, 9 of them in total. The cause of death for the first few was thought to be genetic, but it was later revealed she had smothered most of them to gain sympathy and attention. Blanche Monier's mother imprisoned her in a windowless room for 25 years, simply because she fell in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. Under her mother's control, Blanche was kept in darkness, starved, and left to rot in her own filth, until authorities discovered her in 1901 weighing just 55 pounds and barely clinging on to life. Spanish woman Aurora Rodriguez conceived her daughter Hildegard as an experiment to create the perfect human. Hildegard became a prodigy, reading at age 2, speaking 4 languages by 8, and entering law school by the age of 13. But when she eventually sought independence as an adult, Aurora declared the experiment a failure and shot her daughter in her sleep. She later said the sculptor, after discovering the most minimal imperfection in his work, destroys it. She spent most of her 26-year sentence in a mental asylum.